All right, Anons. My husband told me I should never post family business on the internet, but frankly, I'm at my wit's end and need to tell someone who will just listen. Be me, almost 60. I've been married to the same man for 35 years. He's a good, quiet man who worked with his hands his whole life to give our family everything we needed. I have one daughter, Gail. She's in her mid-20s. I consider myself a feminist, not the kind you see online today, mind you. I marched for equal pay in the 80s. I fought for the right to have a career and a family without being penalized. My friends and I wanted a seat at the table, not to flip the table over and demand someone else pull out our chair for us. We wanted independence, real strength, the ability to stand on our own 2 feet. I look at my daughter and I see a complete distortion of everything we stood for. This whole mess really started when she met Mark about 2 years ago. When Gail first brought him home, I was honestly relieved. She'd dated a string of guys before who were, let's just say they weren't keepers, unemployed artists, wannabe musicians, guys who called themselves entrepreneurs but lived with their parents. Mark was different. He was an engineer, a bit shy maybe, but very polite. He looked you in the eye when he spoke. He had a firm handshake. He brought a bottle of wine for me and my husband the first time he came over for dinner. Listened intently when my husband talked about his garden. He just seemed like a solid, decent young man, the kind of guy you hope your daughter finds. Gail seemed happy too, genuinely happy. For the first 6 months or so, things were great. They seemed like a normal, healthy couple. Mark was clearly smitten with her. He'd look at her like she was the only person in the room. He supported her passions, even when they seemed a bit abstract to a guy like him. She was working part-time at a coffee shop back then, talking about finding herself. He never once belittled it. He'd listen to her stories about difficult customers and nod along. The turning point, the moment the first crack appeared, was when they decided to move in together. It was about 1.5 years ago, sometime in the fall. Mark had a good job, a stable income. He found a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a decent part of the city. More space than they needed, but he said he wanted her to have room for a home office or art studio if she wanted one. I thought it was sweet. My husband thought it was practical. Gail thought it was a chance to establish her new world order. The first time I visited their new place, I noticed the dynamic had already shifted. Mark was carrying in boxes, assembling furniture. You know, the heavy lifting. Gail was directing traffic from the center of the living room, holding a cup of tea. She was pointing and instructing him where to put things, occasionally sighing about how men just instinctively try to dominate a space with their presence. This was said while he was struggling with a heavy bookshelf he had bought for her books. I bit my tongue. It's not my place to interfere, I told myself. They're just settling in. But it wasn't just settling in. It was the new normal. A few weeks later, I called Gail to see how things were going. She spent 20 minutes complaining. The issue? Mark had bought a new TV, a pretty big one. Her complaint wasn't about the money. It was about the principle of the thing. She told me, with complete seriousness, that his purchase was an act of subtle patriarchal aggression. I asked her to explain. Her reasoning was that a large television is a symbol of male-centric entertainment, sports, action movies. It creates a non-inclusive atmosphere in the shared living space. I asked her if she watched TV. She said of course she did. She loved her streaming shows. I asked if they worked on the new TV. A short pause. Well, yes, but that's not the point. I later found out from Mark, who mentioned it in passing and with a sad little laugh, that he bought it so they could have better movie nights together. He'd even set up her streaming accounts on it before he used it himself. This was the pattern. Mark would do something thoughtful, and Gail would reframe it as an insult or a display of toxic masculinity. It was like she had a playbook of buzzwords, and she was determined to use every single one. My husband and I had them over for dinner a month or 2 after they moved in. Mark was telling my husband about a challenging project at work. He was excited about it, a problem he was trying to solve. Gail interrupted him mid-sentence. "It must be nice," she said, looking at me for solidarity, "to be able to talk about your work without having your competence constantly questioned because of your gender." The table went silent. Mark just stared at his plate. My husband, bless his heart, just looked confused. I tried to salvage the conversation. "Well, Mark, it sounds like you're doing a great job. We're proud of you." Gail scoffed, a literal scoff. She said that praising a man for professional success just reinforces the systemic expectation that men should be the primary breadwinners, putting undue pressure on them and simultaneously devaluing women's contributions, both professional and domestic. Mark, the man who was actually paying for nearly their entire life together, just took a sip of water and said nothing. That's when I started to really worry. I saw him shrinking. The confident, cheerful young man we first met was being replaced by a quiet, cautious one who seemed to weigh every word before he spoke, as if expecting it to be used against him. The financial situation was something I only pieced together over time. Gail quit her coffee shop job about 6 months into them living together. She announced she was going to be a full-time writer and social justice advocate, which, in practice, meant she spent all day on social media getting into arguments. I asked her how she was going to contribute to the bills. This was a grave mistake. She launched into a tirade about how I was thinking in outdated capitalist terms. She explained that her emotional labor in managing the household and educating Mark on social issues was a contribution far more valuable than a simple paycheck. She said she was decolonizing their domestic partnership. I had no idea what that meant. I still don't. What it meant in reality was that Mark paid for everything: the rent, the utilities, the internet, the car insurance, the groceries, all of it. And not just the necessities. He paid for her clothes, her subscriptions to various services, her trips to the city to attend workshops. One time, I was on the phone with her, and she was complaining that Mark was being financially controlling. My heart sank. I thought, oh no, here it is. He's a monster behind closed doors. I asked her what happened. The financially controlling behavior was that he had asked her if they could maybe cut back on the grocery bill, which was apparently astronomical. He had gently suggested that maybe they didn't need to buy the $5 artisanal bread and the imported cheese every week. Gail described this to me as an attempt to control her body and her nourishment, a classic patriarchal tactic. She had thrown the expensive cheese at him. She told me this story as if she were the hero standing up to a tyrant. I just felt sick to my stomach for that poor young man. It wasn't just the money, it was the constant dripping erosion of his entire being. He had hobbies. He used to enjoy working on his old car on weekends. Gail put a stop to that. She called it his toxic grease monkey phase. She complained about the smell and said the sight of car parts was triggering. He liked to go fishing with his dad. Gail told him it was a blood sport and that it promoted a violent form of male bonding. So he stopped going. He started spending his weekends just sitting, watching TV, the big offensive one, with the volume low, or reading, anything to avoid a confrontation, anything to keep the peace. My husband noticed it too. He's a man of few words, but he sees everything. After one particularly awkward visit where Gail spent the whole time critiquing a new shed he'd built, a phallic monument to suburban mediocrity, he said to me in the car on the way home, "That boy looks like he's walking on eggshells." He was right. Mark was living in a minefield where the rules changed every day. If he tried to help with the cooking, he was invading her space and implying she couldn't handle it. If he didn't offer to help, he was exhibiting weaponized incompetence and defaulting to traditional gender roles. There was no winning move. I tried to talk to Gail once, gently. I invited her out for lunch, just the two of us. I said something like, "Honey, Mark seems a little down lately. Is everything all right with you two?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, you mean his male fragility is showing? He's just not used to being in a relationship with a strong woman who challenges him. He needs to do the work and unpack his privilege." She spoke about him like he was a broken appliance that needed fixing, not a person she claimed to love. She said he was on a journey of unlearning his toxic traits. I asked her what toxic traits. She couldn't give me a straight answer. It was all vague nonsense. The way he talks over me sometimes. I'd never seen him get a word in edgewise. His need to be the provider while she spent his money. His emotional unavailability after she told him not to burden her with his feelings. It was like talking to a brick wall that quoted angry blog posts. The most infuriating part for me, as her mother and as a woman who fought for real equality, was the hypocrisy. She preached about female independence while being utterly dependent on a man. She talked about smashing the patriarchy while enforcing a one-sided dynamic in her own home that would make a 1950s housewife blush. The only difference was that the 50s housewife was usually expected to at least be pleasant and cook a meal. Gail did neither. Her main contribution to the household was a constant stream of criticism. The apartment was often a mess, dishes in the sink, laundry piled up. She would call these pockets of resistance against domestic servitude. Mark would come home from a 10-hour workday and quietly clean up after her. I know because I dropped by unannounced once. I was in their neighborhood and wanted to drop off some mail that had come to our house. I found Mark on his hands and knees, scrubbing a spot on the kitchen floor. Gail was on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when I came in. She just said, "Mom, I'm busy dismantling oppressive power structures online. Can't talk." Mark just gave me a tired smile, got up, and gave me a hug. He looked so exhausted, not just physically. His eyes were weary. The light that had been in them when they first met was completely gone. I started to feel a real sense of anger, not just at Gail, but at myself for not saying anything. But what could I say? She was my daughter. You want to believe they'll figure it out. You hope it's just a phase. The holidays were always a nightmare. Last Christmas, Mark bought her a beautiful necklace. Simple, elegant, clearly expensive. He was so nervous giving it to her. I watched him fidget with the box before he handed it over. She opened it, looked at it for a second, and gave a tight, thin smile. "Thank you, Mark. It's nice." Later, I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends. "He got me jewelry. Can you believe it? So cliché. It's like he's trying to brand me as his property. A decorative object." She didn't wear it. I never saw it again. I asked Mark later what she got him for Christmas. He looked at the floor and mumbled, "Oh, she told me her gift was releasing me from the consumerist obligation to exchange material goods." So, nothing? She got him nothing. The imbalance was staggering. He gave her everything: his money, his time, his energy, his patience. In return, she gave him lectures, criticism, and a sense of perpetual inadequacy. My husband, who had always tried to be patient with her, started avoiding her. He couldn't stand the way she spoke to him. He's a simple man. He spent 40 years as a carpenter. He built the house we live in. To Gail, he was a walking symbol of everything she hated. She'd critique the way he ate his food, the way he watched the news, the fact that he enjoyed a beer after work. Every little thing was evidence of his unexamined privilege. He never argued back. He would just get up and go work in his garage. It broke my heart to see my kind, gentle husband treated like an enemy in his own home by his own child. And I saw how Mark watched these interactions. He saw how Gail treated her father, and I think he saw his own future. The final straw, the thing that made me realize this had to end, happened a few weeks before the fateful dinner. Mark's father had a health scare. It turned out to be okay in the end, but for a few days, it was very serious. Mark was naturally very upset and worried. He had to drive a few hours to the hospital to be with his family. He called Gail from the road to check in. I know this because Gail called me right after, furious, not with concern for Mark's father, not with sympathy for what Mark was going through. She was angry because Mark was going to miss a very important online seminar she wanted him to attend with her. The seminar was about deconstructing masculine archetypes in modern media. She told me, "He's being so selfish. He's using his family emergency as an excuse to avoid doing the work on our relationship." I was speechless. I literally could not form words. I finally just said, "Gail, his father is in the hospital. Have you no empathy?" "Empathy is a tool of the patriarchy used to silence women's legitimate frustrations," she shot back. It was like she had an automated response for everything. Any normal human emotion was twisted into a political slogan. I hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, just staring at the wall. This wasn't my daughter. This was a stranger. A cold, cruel ideologue who had replaced the sweet girl I raised. And she was destroying a good man. She was draining the life out of him, day by day, insult by insult. And he was just taking it. Because he was a decent, patient person. Because he loved the girl she used to be. I realized I couldn't be a passive observer anymore. My silence was a form of complicity. My hope that she would snap out of it was foolish. She wasn't going to snap out of it. She was digging in deeper. This was her identity now. The professional victim. The armchair revolutionary. And Mark was her primary target. her live-in symbol of the patriarchy that she could control and punish at will. I decided to have them over for one last dinner. I didn't know what I was going to do, exactly. I didn't have a grand plan. But I knew I had to see them together in my home one more time. I needed to confirm that what I was seeing wasn't an exaggeration, that it was as bad as I thought. I needed to look that young man in the eye and see if there was anything left to save. So I called them up. I used my calmest, most pleasant mom voice. "Gail, honey, why don't you and Mark come over for dinner on Saturday? Your father and I would love to see you." There was a pause. I could hear her thinking, weighing the pros and cons. A free meal versus having to endure her problematic parents. The free meal won. "Sure, Mom, I guess we can. We'll be there around 7. She didn't sound enthusiastic. She sounded like she was doing us a huge favor. I just said, "Wonderful, we'll see you then." As I hung up the phone, I had a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't dread, it was resolve. I felt like the curtain was about to come down on this whole sad little play. I had no idea how right I was. Saturday came. I spent the afternoon cooking. My husband was out in the yard, tidying up. We didn't talk much about it, but there was a tension in the air. We both knew the evening would be an ordeal. They arrived a few minutes past 7. Mark was holding a bouquet of flowers for me and a 6-pack of my husband's favorite beer. He always remembered. He gave me a hug and a quiet, "Hi, Suzanne." He looked tired, more tired than usual. Gail breezed in behind him, empty-handed, already on the attack. "Mom, I see you're still watering that ridiculously unsustainable lawn. You know how much water that wastes, right?" That's how the evening began. My husband came in, wiping his hands on a rag. He smiled at Mark, pleased with the beer. "Thanks, son." He went to hug Gail, and she did this little sidestep thing, offering him a stiff pat on the arm instead. "Dad, we've talked about respecting personal boundaries." He just nodded, his face falling a little, and retreated to the living room. Mark followed him, and I heard them starting to talk about a football game. A normal, simple conversation. From the kitchen, I heard Gail let out an exasperated sigh. "Can they be any more stereotypical?" she muttered to no one in particular. I called everyone to the table. I'd made a roast chicken, mashed potatoes, all the comfort foods. The kind of meal Mark loved and Gail used to love, before she decided home cooking was a symbol of female oppression, unless someone else was doing it for her. As we sat down, Mark immediately started helping, passing dishes, making sure everyone had what they needed. Gail just sat there, scrutinizing her plate. "I hope this chicken is ethically sourced," she announced. I assured her it was from the local butcher. She then launched into a lecture. For the next 10 minutes, we were treated to a monologue about the problematic nature of the poultry industry and its intersection with patriarchal capitalism. My husband just stared at his plate, methodically cutting his food into tiny pieces. Mark tried to steer the conversation. "Suzanne, this tastes amazing. The potatoes are perfect." Gail immediately cut him off. "Don't use praise of domestic labor to distract from the larger systemic issues, Mark. It's a common tactic men use to placate women and keep them in their designated roles." Mark just put his fork down. He didn't say another word for the next 20 minutes. He just ate in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate. The rest of the conversation was just Gail holding court. She criticized my husband's political views. He doesn't really have any, he just reads the paper. She criticized a movie I mentioned I'd enjoyed, rife with male gaze. She criticized their apartment building for not having a compost bin, which she somehow blamed on Mark's indifference to the planet. It was relentless. A fire hose of negativity and judgment. Through it all, I watched Mark. He had perfected the art of being invisible. He made no eye contact, showed no reaction. He had completely shut down. It was a survival mechanism. When the meal was finally over, my husband stood up and started clearing the plates. "I'll get these," he said quietly. Gail immediately pounced. "Wow, look at you, breaking down those gender roles. It only took you 60 years. It was a nasty cutting remark, and it was meant to hurt. He ignored her. He just carried a stack of plates into the kitchen. Mark stood up without a word and gathered the rest of the dishes and all the silverware. His movements were efficient, practiced. This was clearly his role at home, too. He followed my husband into the kitchen. Gail remained at the table, scrolling through her phone, basking in the glory of her intellectual superiority. I got up and went into the kitchen. My husband was rinsing plates at one side of the sink, and Mark was on the other, loading the dishwasher. They weren't speaking, just working together in a comfortable silence. From the dining room, we could hear Gail talking loudly on her phone to a friend. You would not believe the toxic environment in here. I'm literally surrounded by unexamined privilege. It's so draining having to be the only enlightened person in the room. That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The sight of these two good men, my husband and this young man, who might as well have been my son, quietly cleaning up the mess while my daughter sat there congratulating herself on her own virtue. It was too much. My husband finished his stack, patted my arm, and went out the back door to his workshop, his sanctuary. I was alone in the kitchen with Mark. He was carefully arranging the glasses on the top rack of the dishwasher. His shoulders were slumped. He looked defeated. I walked over to him. He didn't seem to notice me at first. I put my hand on his arm. He startled, looking up at me. His eyes were so empty. I knew I had to say it. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. I looked him straight in the eye, and I spoke quietly, but with all the conviction I had in my soul. Mark, you are a good, kind man. You deserve so much better than her. His reaction wasn't what I expected. There was no big emotional outburst. It was a flicker of something in his eyes, a spark, and then a profound, soul-deep look of relief washed over his face. It was the look of a man who had been holding his breath underwater for years and was finally allowed to surface. He just nodded slowly, a single, deliberate nod. A tear welled up in his eye, and he quickly wiped it away. "Thank you, Suzanne," he whispered. His voice was thick with emotion. I really needed to hear that. He closed the dishwasher, turned off the water, and wiped his hands on a towel. He walked out of the kitchen with a posture that was suddenly straighter than it had been all night. Gail was still on her phone. No, I'm serious. It's like he doesn't even try to see things from my perspective. Mark walked right past the table to the coat rack in the hall. He took his jacket off the hook. Gail finally noticed. "Where are you going? We're not leaving yet." He put his jacket on. He didn't look angry. He looked calm, resigned. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice even. "You're not." Gail's face contorted in confusion. "What are you talking about? Stop being dramatic." He turned to face her fully. For the first time all night, he looked her directly in the eye. "I'm done, Gail. We're done." The silence that followed was deafening. Gail just stared at him, her mouth slightly open. You're breaking up with me? Here? In my parents' house? This is because of them, isn't it? They've been poisoning you against me." Mark shook his head. "No, this is because of you." He walked to the front door. "I'll pack a bag for you. You can pick up the rest of your things during the week. Just leave the key." He opened the door. He paused and looked back, not at Gail, but at me, standing in the kitchen doorway. He gave me a small, grateful nod. Then he was gone. The door clicked shut. Gail sat frozen for a solid 10 seconds. Then her head snapped toward me. Her face was a mask of pure rage and disbelief. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "What did you do? What did you say to him?" I didn't raise my voice. I was strangely calm. "I told him the truth," I said, "something you haven't heard in a very long time." The dam broke. She flew into a complete meltdown. "You betrayed me! You're my mother! You're supposed to be on my side. You chose a man over me. Some feminist you are." Tears were streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of fury, the tantrum of a child who had her favorite toy taken away. I just looked at her, my daughter, and felt a profound sadness. "I fought for women to be strong," I said, my voice steady, "to be partners, equals. I didn't fight for them to become helpless tyrants who drain the life out of good people just to feel powerful. You just watched a kind man get systematically broken down for 2 years, and you thought it was your right. The real world doesn't work that way, Gail." She just screamed, incoherent words about betrayal and patriarchy. It's been a few weeks since that night. Gail is staying with a friend. She sends me long, rambling texts every few days, blaming me, my husband, Mark, and society for all her problems. Mark sent me a single text message a week later. It just said, "Thank you for giving me permission to save myself. I'll never forget it. I don't know if I did the right thing. As a mother, my heart aches, but as a woman and as a human being, I know I did. I saw a good person drowning, and I threw him a rope. My daughter will have to learn to swim on her own.